I mean, focusing first on the data, the reality, if you like, on the right. This is an analysis conducted by Nielsen a few years ago, and it's been widely quoted, and actually is very consistent with other findings from other companies, which is that when you look at campaigns and the variables that affect whether or not the campaign generates a strong sales uplift, it's actually creativity that has the biggest influence. In other words, if you've got a highly effective creative, you get a strong sales uplift, and if you don't, you get a very small sales uplift. And that influences the media choice. In other words, choices about media that affect frequency or recency or who you're targeting. And that contrasts actually with what marketers typically think. So this data on the left shows the equivalent from a survey conducted last year by the MMA, where actually marketers think that media choices have the biggest dominance and creativity has relatively less power. So I think it's quite important because I think at the moment because media is so complex and confusing and diverse, media agencies, of course, have a lot of say in how you create and run and plan your campaigns. But we're kind of forgetting that the actual creativity that you put, the content that you deploy in those media, can have it's a bigger variable. I used to work for Kantar Millwall Brown, which was the creative effectiveness division for Kantar. And we used to say that the most variable was the creativity, and the data certainly supports that. In fact, my next slide illustrates this. So,
Wait 2 seconds. Wait
of
2 seconds,
course,
because there's actually a question coming in
yeah,
here, and while we take that question, I also have a little poll that just is very closely related to this specific slide. Give me 1 second here. So I'm just going to start it here for everyone. So the poll goes like this: Do your company measure creativity and the impact on your advertisements? So yeah, you can just go ahead. I'm just going to bring up the poll. It's quite interesting, the result here. So there's only one
okay, so not really. No.
that says yes here, and 33% says no, I'm not sure. There's also quite a few, and a lot that.
I wish we did. So actually, 92, well, effectively 99 out of 10 are saying not, you don't really. Wow. Okay. Now I think that's really important. I mean, my next slide here, Christian, that I flashed up earlier, I'll just maximize it now. This is why I'm passionate about creativity. Now, okay, this does need a bit of explaining. This is data from Kantar. It's been published, which is for online video advertising, and it's a histogram. So effectively, here on the left hand side, you've got the percentage uplift achieved in ad awareness, right, per 100 ratings. So in other words, how much uplift you get for the amount of exposure that you paid for, right? So in other words, there are some 4% of all campaigns, unfortunately, only achieved a 1% uplift in ad awareness for their 100 ratings, compared with the most effective campaigns that achieved, and there's about 8% of all campaigns did this. Those campaigns achieved more than 12% uplift in ad awareness per 100 ratings. So you can see from the best to the worst, you've got a factor of more than 10. In other words, it is possible, because purely of the differences in creative effectiveness, to have a response that is 10 times bigger because of creative quality. That goes back to what I said. Creative remains the biggest variable of all variables. So the hard thing is, of course, creativity is hard to manage and ensure and engineer. But any company that can foster and measure creativity can create a huge competitive advantage. Does that make sense? I mean, it's quite a complex point, but I'm hoping that makes sense. In other words, it's the variability in terms of impact is phenomenal, and much more, as we talked about before, than nuances in terms of targeting and reach, etc.
Yeah, exactly. I think actually what Gary says here is
Yeah.
quite close to it. because he says that Mark Ritson did a video on market share versus share of voice and stated that the second biggest driver of increasing market share was creativity. And you could say, because you were saying the variable that you can work with is the creativity, because the brand is kind of what it is.
The brand, exactly, the brand is what it is. I mean, the brand variable is basically brand size, brand penetration, or whatever, how they measure it. But yeah, fine, you can't adjust that. You can't say, oh, I want my advertising to be more effective, so I'll double the size of my brand. No, it's circular. So it's almost irrelevant. It's the only thing you have control of are the media choices you make and the creativity that you use. So and if between the two, creative is the much bigger variable, and also we have a lot of learning again from Byron Sharp that actually, if you focus on reach, you'll probably be, generally that's a good principle anyway. Then creative is the big variable for competitive advantage. So you need to know how your creative's doing and how to create better, more effective creative in future.